4th century, to some degree, probably mostly chant in the beginning, but eventually it got a bit more elaborate. One of the reasons it became that way is we're gonna like jump massively ahead into the modern era. So we're thinking 1600s in Rome. The patron class is very much into opera. That's what you're hiring all the musicians to do. But during Passiontide, and indeed during the entirety of Lent in Rome, for instance, you couldn't perform opera. It's far too secular. It's just not appropriate. So what is the patron class to do during Lent when they can't go to their fine operas? Well, they're going to find a way to get around this. And so, what about an oratorio? It's not an opera because the subject is sacred. So we can come up with maybe an oratorio based on Esther, or maybe some saint that we've never really heard of, but we can we can come up with a libretto, that's the text for it, and then we can write a piece of music that is dramatic and feels that it fits the bill for the patron class, that we're getting our entertainment. It's not as good because it can't be staged the way an opera is, but it's a story, it's exciting, there's new music, great singers. So it's funny, I always like to sort of deconstruct some of these myths we have. There's part of me that would love to, present this passion in this sort of pure, beautiful tradition. And no, it's not. Like, there's this interaction with this patron class, say, this interests of money and power, of course, that are intervening in the church and intervening in art, promoting art in many ways, but also intervening in the way that the church does its music and its liturgy. So some of you might have heard of Handel's La Resurrección, the Resurrection. This is an oratorio. Handel didn't like writing oratorios. He wanted to write opera, but he was in Rome at the time, so he had to write an oratorio. So that's one of Handel's earliest examples of an oratorio. And he didn't get to writing oratorios until in England, until he wasn't making enough money with operas. So one thing to say about some of these early passions is that they had original librettos, largely speaking. That means the text was written independently. So like La Resurrection, the Resurrection by Handel, rather than just taking the resurrection account, say from Mark or John, which is very short, it's a whole story built out with maybe even new characters invented, new drama, new intrigue, again, because we're mirroring it off the operatic style. When you get to the Bach Passion, now keep in mind, now that's moving up to Germany. So Lutheran context, very different. You don't have the same desire for opera in these northern German states. So by comparison to some of the earlier passions, especially in the Catholic world, in these major hubs, Vienna, Rome, places like that, it's not so operatic. It is a bit more devotional, but it's still a bit gaudy. And that's what comes from a bit of that desire for the operatic drama that comes in. And so you'll find one of the earliest Lutheran passions is called the Brockes Passion. Huge, famous, but it's, again, the libretto is all original, and it's as is pretty common to the passions at that time. It's very pietistic. That means very individual, very emotional, very, in my opinion, liturgically excessive, and so it's a little bit evangelical, not proto-evangelical, you might say, or proto-Methodist. So then by the time you get to something like the Bach Passions, which we're most familiar with these days, Bach is his musical style is musically antique. He's not writing in the most exciting styles, which is one reason his church employers don't care for him so much, because he looks backward. And so his musical style, if you've ever heard the Bach Passions, is really quite restrained. But he still has arias, lengthy arias, and hymns that intersperse what is otherwise purely the gospel accounts. So it's an improvement. Obviously, this is my opinion. It's a major improvement from some of the earlier passions, because the libretto is strictly the biblical text, except for intervening arias, hymns, right. And they are very pietistic. They're very emotional, excessive, going on and on. Amazing music, but from a strictly poetic and theological, devotional perspective, maybe not ideal, or maybe it was ideal at that time in that context. So I want to jump ahead now, because again, I have to really cut things short today. We'll go to England, and more than a century after the Bach Passions were written and performed, they're starting to be recovered, and they're starting to make it across Europe and into the English-speaking world, and they're very exciting. All of the works of Bach, but these passions are, the magnum opus of Bach. Like, wow, and some of the Bach Passions have been lost, but the great Matthew and John Passions are completely intact, and so they're wonderfully inspiring in the English-speaking world. But the style, what I was talking about, all this pietistic stuff, it's not really appropriate for the Church of England. And it's also in German, which is not very appropriate for the Church of England. And also it's written for orchestra and all these things, which aren't very appropriate for the Church of England at the time. Church of England, choir, organ. Let's hold back on anything else for another century. Don't let other instruments in. So the first passion in the English-speaking world in this modern era, over a century after Bach, is by John Stainer, and it's called The Crucifixion. Has anyone heard of that? Yeah. Some choir members. Yes, good job. We sing some John Stainer. He went into, for instance, St. Paul's Cathedral in London, and rebuilt the choral program. So it went into lots of these English cathedrals and revitalized things, brought a new musical standard. But it was the early Victorian era, and his foray into this passion genre, the Crucifixion, is an original libretto. So not just the text of the scripture. It has arias, it has hymns, and it is incredibly Victorian. My mom texted me just the other week that a nearby Episcopal church was performing the Stainer, The Crucifixion. She's like, oh yeah, me and my friend are gonna go. I'm like, oh yeah, you could. I don't know that I would. And it's funny to me because it continues to be performed, what was it, maybe the Downers Grove Choral Society or something like that. One of them nearby recently performed it. And again, my opinion, I don't think it's held up very well. It's so emotional, grandiose in ways I don't find very liturgically tasteful. And then because it has its own libretto and it has these long arias, it superimposes a very specific view on the atonement that maybe isn't as popular right now, and I don't know that in this room we'd find it ideal to. And so the way it superimposes this early Victorian worldview. I don't love it. It has some good hymns. So about 50 years later, a little less, we get Charles Wood, which we sing even more of in the choir. So he's still Victorian. But by that point in the Church of England, there's been something called the Oxford movement. Yeah. Also known as the Catholic Revival in the Church of England. And it is inspired by the rediscovery of ancient liturgy, by the rediscovery and translation of ancient Latin and Greek hymns. So those of you who have hymnals or who can share hymnals, get them out and turn to 162. 162. I should have brought more hymnals. But 162. Who wrote the words to this hymn? Who can find that? 162. Can someone find the
Fortunate.
Yes, Venatius Honorius Fortunatus. He is a 6th century
British?
yeah, very British, yeah. Bishop and saint. Is anyone's patron saint Saint Fortunatus? Not mine. So he penned 2 extraordinarily important hymns about the cross, about passion. This one is Felix, yeah, I've been doing too much Spanish. Regis Prodeunt. In our hymnal, you can see it's the royal banners forward go. I'm going to read the John Mason Neale, who is an Oxford movement priest, his translation of the first verse. It says, "The royal banner forward goes, the mystic cross refulgent glows, where he in flesh who made, upon the tree of pain is laid." So, beautiful text. In the hymnal, I'm also going to point out verse 3. "O tree of beauty, tree most fair, ordained those holy limbs to bear. Gone is thy shame, each crimson bough proclaims the King of glory now." So in these early hymns, we get a lot of this ancient view of what the Passion, what the cross is about. And so Charles Wood is being influenced by all of these theologians and creates a real enrichment of the Church of England's liturgy, of its music. I like to say in brief, to describe the Oxford movement, that it's how you can remember it is that it takes beauty really seriously as a part of worship. So that means architectural and liturgical beauty, musical beauty. And so at this time in the late 19th century, you're getting this transformation of these English churches and restoring the medieval beauty that had been destroyed by the Puritans or movements after it. So now in our hymnal, I want to look at page 166.
The next 2 authors being Clement of Alexander and Peter Abelard.
Yes. 2
major other early heavy hitters.
Indeed. Yes. Also restored to the Church of England thanks to the Oxford movement. 166. Who is the hymn writer? Same guy. And mostly translated by John Mason Neale, Oxford movement priest. This is sung just about every Good Friday in most Anglican churches. The Pange Lingua. This is a little confusing because there are 2 Pange Lingua hymns. This is the ancient one. The second one, which this is the original. The second one was written by Thomas Aquinas. It's a medieval hymn. Pange Lingua, Sing My Tongue. This is Sing My Tongue, the Glorious Battle. The great battle, the great fight, what the Aquinas hymn is "Sing my tongue the glorious body," so it's about the Blessed Sacrament, and so that the Aquinas Panjalingua is often sung on Maundy Thursday, the ancient Panjalingua Good Friday. So Charles Wood is contacted by Milner White, Reverend Milner White of King's College, who says, "We need passions in the Church of England. We can't do the Bach passions. They're theologically inappropriate. Would you write one based on the Mark Passion?" And so Charles Wood throws one together and decides to use just the words of St. Mark, plus as the major framing device to inform the theology of the cross, the ancient Panjalingua hymn. So this is something that I think makes the Charles Wood Passion a lot more timeless, because again, he's drawing from an ancient hymn, a time not his own, and then of course he's using the words of Scripture, translated Scripture, St. Mark, and he's not adding anything, except he did add one "Release us," which I told the choir when the choir is shouting for we want Barabbas, we needed that, so he added that. Otherwise, it's really restrained. I'm going to play just the very beginning of what the Passion sounds like. This is a professional choir, so we won't quite sound this good, but Wood writes this little introduction to the Panjalingua hymn, and I think it gives like a feeling, a sense for the excitement, I guess, the breadth of and the depth of what's to come. Now the Panjalingua hymn begins. Yeah. So I want to jump back just in comparison's sake. The Crucifixion by John Stainer, its theological framing device is, Jesus died for me, Jesus died for me. Oh, he suffered so much for me. He suffered all the pains he endured. That's good. That is worthwhile. That is part of a wonderful tradition. This framing device is cosmic. Seeing the great battle. What kind of battle? Jesus fought? Okay. How did Jesus fight? As a victim, won the day. So again, the framing device is cosmic, and the breadth of this, I think it's profound. One of the things that's particularly strangely beautiful about this Panjalingua hymn is this comparison. It talks a lot about the tree in the garden and compares it to the tree of the cross, and has these beautiful and strange words about adoring the wood of the cross. In the Passion, the wood passion that we're performing. This verse adoring the wood and the nail comes at a really pivotal point. So the wood passion, there's 5 movements. Starts with Last Supper, Gethsemane, etc. After Jesus is taken away to be crucified, then there's some silence. And then just the top treble voices come in singing, and I'm going to read you the words. Faithful cross, true sign of triumph. Oh, this is a different translation. But be for all the noblest tree, none in foliage, none in blossom, none in fruit thine equal be, symbol of the world's redemption, for the weight that hung on thee. I'm going to play just a bit of that. Again, slightly different text. I want to look at just a couple other spots, just so you can hear a bit more of the passion and get a little bit of commentary on some of how wood dramatizes the parts of the passion. I'm going to jump over to one of the crucify sections, which I'm always telling the choir to crucify, to use really, really dramatic and strong diction. And they have like my scrawling in their scroll about like crying for blood and being a murderous mob, which they do very well. So here is one of these crucified sections. The people and the day. I just love by and large, the wood passion has a fairly restrained style, but he definitely uses the modern chromatic. Did you hear that? The twisting of the cantor line to be crucified moves up the chromatic line, and then the same thing when he speaks of Jesus being scourged, being whipped. The bit of that sort of modern chromatic dramatizing. Now what happens is the march to Golgotha. And so the organ Wood was, a choral director and an organist. And it really, really shows that he's an organist because the organ part is just so natural, so beautiful. So you're gonna hear bum in the bass of the organ, bum, 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 and it basically won't stop until the end of the movement. I just want you to hear the beginning, and the choir is first. The organ's gonna bring in this march rhythm, and then the choir is gonna start narrating. Spin again, it's running out of time. So this continues as, as Jesus continues to be tortured by the soldiers. And I want to jump ahead to where they put the crown, they put the robes of purple on him, and they worship him. And just listen to how Wood puts this. It's that, like, to describe the irony of the situation. Oh, it's just such a poignant moment from all this, the drama and violence they're doing to him. And, as they put the crown on him, worship this king of the Jews. Just the way Wood frames that with such sensitivity, the horrible irony. Last thing I just want to point out before I have to head back is the final section. Those of you who have been to a Good Friday or often Passion Sunday service, when you get to the crucifixion, you stand. It's usually done. And we'll do that on Sunday as able. And when we get to that section, Wood drops the organ entirely because he wants to be even more traditional. He wants to be even more solemn and sacred. And so you lose a lot of the sort of this dramatic modern writing. He pulls back to the most ancient of traditions. And so the evangelist part, the narrator, who's ostensibly St. Mark, starts singing a really, really simple chant line. We jump ahead to that fifth movement. Here's the cantor with the chant line.
And they bring to the place Golgotha, interpreted the place of a skull. And they gave him to drink wine mingled with myrrh, but he he that it not.
The choir's gonna jump in, and he's keeping with a restrained style. He writes in a Renaissance style, not as antique, not ancient, but pretty old sounding, pretty solemn. That's how the last movement goes. Cantor, choir, cantor, and then Jesus speaking his last word, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which is sung very dramatically. So our choir, some of whom are here, has started working on this in September. And probably should have rehearsed more in October than we did. Yeah, Morgan, why didn't you bring it? That said, it's been in the works for a while because it is such a substantive, wonderful piece, and I'm really excited to bring something of this magnitude that's musically significant, and of course it's made to be part of the liturgy. And then also I have two wonderful friends who are going to sing the part of the evangelist. You heard that cantor line, and the part of Jesus. Wonderful singers and very sensitive. I know you're going to really appreciate. The choir hasn't heard the voices yet. They won't hear them till Thursday. But I think it's going to be such a wonderful, poignant, and solemn experience. I hope you can come back for that next Sunday at 6 p.m. I hope you can bring someone along as well. Thank you. I'm going to go upstairs and warm up the choir.
Thank you so much, Seth.
Thank you.
I appreciate you